Trappings and Trinkets knitting podcast and other stuff too. I'm Nicole, I'm your host. This week I have a lot of knitting related things to talk about, and I'm going to start today with a project that I'm really excited about. I was at knitting group 2 weeks ago, I guess, and the yarn shop owner was talking about having just seen a post on Ravelry about something called the Welcome Blanket Project. And I love this idea. It's actually, I think, the same people who organized the Pink Pussy Hats for the Women's March. But now they've decided to turn their attention to refugees. And what they are doing with this is talking about how, what if instead of a 2,000-mile border wall to keep people out, what if instead of that we had 2,000 miles worth of yarn that we use to welcome people in? So if you are, if you want to welcome a refugee family, if you want to be a part of this project, I'll put the website with all the information down here. And the basics of it are you knit a blanket. They suggest a size of about 40 inches square. They say that if you're doing it in worsted weight, that would take about 1,200 yards of yarn. I think now that I say that, though, the one I'm knitting is going to take 8 skeins-ish, so that's more like 1,600. So maybe they were basing that 1,200 yards on like chunky or bulky. So once you get your blanket knit, you send it to the Smart Museum of Art, which is on the campus of the University of Chicago. And on the website, it has the mailing address. And they suggest that you include with it a note about your own family's immigration story. And, you know, like for someone like me, that's not going to be super easy. I don't know a lot of specifics because I think a lot of the early relatives of my country arrived here somewhere in the 1800s. So I don't know a lot about that, but you know, I can still write a little bit about it. And they also suggest that maybe you want to write the recipient of your blanket some sort of word of advice about moving to a new country or moving to our country. So I love all of those ideas. So I would encourage you, if you have a heart that wants to give to somebody else, this would be a great project, and you get to knit. So I'll show you what I have been working on. This is my welcome blanket. And it is, the pattern I'm using is the 10-stitch zigzag, I believe it's called. I wanted it to go a little faster, so I made it a 20-stitch zigzag. And basically that just means that each section is twice as wide. So the way this is constructed, so you're knitting each zigzag separately, and you're connecting one stitch on the side every other row to make it connect with the rest of the blanket. So obviously right now I'm working on the gray. The one thing I would do differently from what I'm doing now is if I did this again, I would buy some double-pointed needles in the size that I use. I use double-pointed needles for almost nothing. Like I really can't remember the last time I used them. Even stuff like Kitchener stitch, which I think a lot of people use double-pointed needles for, I'll still just use my circular needles. So I did not own the double-pointed needle in the same size. I still own some from a long time ago in certain sizes, but I'm doing this on a 7, and I didn't have a size 7. So I would only use, I would suggest that you use double-pointed needles for this because you're only knitting, if you're using the pattern numbers, you're knitting 10 stitches at a time. I'm knitting 20 stitches, which would very easily fit on a double-pointed needle, and then you wouldn't have this wiggly cord hanging from your work. So that's my only suggestion, but it's a really well-written pattern. It's very easy to do. I think it's going to have a nice look once it's finished. And the yarn I'm using is Cascade Pacific, which is a acrylic wool blend, and 213 yards per skein. So yeah, 8 skeins is going to be, well, close, I guess 650 yards. So it'll be a nice size blanket, and I did make it a little bit longer than 40 inches. I wanted it to be, I wanted it to be able to cover from the waist down a little bit over the feet, because when I want a little throw blanket, that's what I want it to cover. So for me, 40 inches was just a little bit small, and I'm not a particularly tall person, so I just thought that might be a little bit more practical size. And oh, I forgot to mention, the blankets are going to be displayed at the Smart Museum, so I don't know if they'll put blankets that aren't that 40-inch square size in the exhibit. I don't know if, like, how they're planning on laying that out, if they're going to fit very well. So I just made the choice that I would rather have a blanket of a good practical size to give to a refugee family rather than have it on display. So that is fine. So the deadline, it's a kind of a soft deadline, but they're going to start displaying all of these welcome blankets at that Smart Museum of Art at the beginning of September. So they want you to try to get them in by then. But if you can't, that is okay too. Just send them in whenever you can, and they're going to continue to display blankets as they arrive. And they're also going to catalog them on a website too. And then after the blankets are displayed and cataloged, then by December, they will be distributing them. And depending on the response, maybe they're going to start distributing them even a little bit earlier. But it said on the website that they will definitely start distributing them to refugee families in December of this year. So do something nice. Welcome a refugee family. You get to knit a blanket, and everybody's happy. So that's my number one priority project right now. And I don't know, I have 4 stripes done. I'm working on number 5, and I think it'll have about 10, maybe 12 stripes total. So I'm about 30, 40% there. So that one's exciting. Other works in progress. So this one, I actually had this last week and I totally forgot about it. This was one that I cast on and I was really excited about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I cast it on. And then as I was making it, and I'm not sure the yarn is kind of dark, so I'm not sure how well the texture will show up here, but it's a heavily textured sweater. It's called the Threadle sweater. Wait, I'm showing you the wrong side. So here we go. Okay, that's more like it. Okay, so a lot of cabling, a lot of twisted rib, just a lot. It's a charted pattern. It's very well written. My reading ability apparently wasn't working when I cast it on because I am doing this out of Malabrigo sock yarn, and for some reason, I totally missed the fact that this is written for worsted weight yarn. So I think what threw me off is that the gauge is like, I don't remember exactly what it is. It's something though that in my mind I was like, oh, I can get that with fingering yarn, and I didn't even look at what size yarn I was supposed to use. So totally my fault. The weird thing is that even as I knit this, this is a 40-inch needle, and I'm like a 39-inch bust. So like this very easily, almost like this looks like it's about 38 inches around to me. So that's not really that far off of, like, I would probably be aiming for a 40-inch hip, and this is like a 38-inch hip, and it hasn't been washed yet, so it might even get a little bit bigger once I wash it. So I worked a little bit more on it, kind of thinking maybe it is gonna be okay, because even though I made it with the wrong yarn, I for some reason made the choice to, like, the way I'm talking about this, you probably think I was like drunk when I when I decided to start this project. I wasn't. Maybe I was really tired that day or something, but yeah, it was a total, I don't know, a total attention span problem. I just wasn't focused on what I was doing. But you know, it happens to everybody. I'm sure you've cast on some sort of project that was doomed from the very start. But I've had fun knitting it. It's very, like, you really have to focus on the chart because there's a lot of stuff going on. But as I look at this, like, there's certain things like this cable in the middle here, like this one. I don't think that looks great in fingering yarn. Like, it's all too close together. So I'm tempted to pull this out and start again with the right kind of yarn. You might see a Threadle version 2 in the coming weeks. But for now, I think this is kind of a doomed project. So it's been hanging out, and I think I've been trying to decide if I want to, if I'm going to stick to my guns, but it's not happening. It needs to go. All right, so moral of the story, focus on what you're doing when you pick a new project. Otherwise, you might end up a cautionary tale, like me. In this bag, I have my circular yoke summer shirt, which, whew, that's wrinkly, which has sat in there for a solid week and a half while I work on my refugee blanket. So it grew a little bit more since the last podcast. And I have to do I probably have to double this in length, and then I'll be at the underarm bind off. So, I'm maybe 30% there on this project too. And that's at Cascade Forest Hills. Boy, I'm using a lot of Cascade right now. Another project that's in progress but is on hold right now is this brioche cowl, which I still really like how it's coming out. This has not been blocked yet, so it looks a little crazy. And the blue side, it's like that. So it's coming out really, really well. But right now, it's waiting for the appearance of more blue yarn. So I have this much left of my beige skein, probably 30% of the skein. And this was yarn that had been salvaged from a sweater that I was never going to wear. And I know that I had the same amount of blue yarn as I had the beige yarn, but I've run out of blue yarn. So I know that there's a ball of blue yarn somewhere in my house. Do you have this disappearing yarn? And it's kind of strange because I really do keep my yarn in a few specific places. So I've gone through all those places and I don't know. I'm not sure where else it could be, but I figure if I wait long enough, I'll just put this one aside. It'll be fine. It's not going anywhere, and it's 95 degrees outside, so it's not like I'm going to be wearing that cowl anytime soon. So that one is waiting, and my other project that is that I don't have to show you, but last time I showed you some black fabric with some rainbowy pinstripes, and that's going to be turned into a dress. I have the dress cut, but I haven't sewn it together yet. So it'll be similar to this one. Last summer I made a bunch of sundresses, and they're just very simple kind of A-line dresses with pockets, and I think that will be a fun addition to my summer sundress wardrobe. So I think those are all, those are all of my projects that are in progress, and I have nothing finished to show you this week because my projects are kind of big right now. So the other reason is because this week I've been very focused on a couple other things. I've been doing some stuff for bags. I have a bunch of new bag fabric, and there's a couple of them I am super excited about, but one in particular, so I cannot wait to show you that. Maybe the next podcast, but I kind of suspect it's going to be probably 2 podcasts from now that I'll be able to show you some bags. But the other thing that has been taking my attention this week is fiber fist bumps. So I got the individual cards package this week. These are also available in a card that has 4 buttons on it in one package. And it just depends how your yarn shop wants to order them. Some yarn shops want them individually wrapped. Some want them on the 4-button card. So I can't tell you how they might be available near you, but if you have a preference, you should tell your yarn shop owner about it. So these are just a few of the styles, and we've got more styles, and those 2. So there's 12 different styles in this initial collection, and all all 12 of them are going to go up in 2 different places, and we're going to have a little giveaway. So the whole point of these fiber fist bumps is that they're supposed to be kind of a atta girl or an atta boy. Good job, you did something. Or some of them are just silly. So some of them are like knitting jokes. So the whole point of them is you're supposed to either get them for yourself as like a little memory of doing something, taking on a new technique, or finishing a project. Or you might give them to a friend because you noticed that they tried steeking for the first time, or they did their first color work project. So this is going to be a giveaway for you and a friend. So I'm going to do 2 giveaways, one on Instagram and one on the Trappings and Trinkets Ravelry group. And if you want, you're welcome to enter in both places. So there's going to be a picture of all 12 buttons from this collection. And what you have to do to enter is just comment on this is my favorite button, and the button I would give to a friend is blank. So maybe you're going to say, my favorite button is the Housework Avoidance Club, and the one that I want to give to a friend is the Knit 2 Socks button. So that's all you have to do. And then tag your friend, and they can enter, you can have 2 tries, because then they can enter and say that they'll take this one, and then they would give their friend the one that you like. So you can do that too. So you can enter on my Instagram account, Coley Monty, or you can enter on the Trappings and Trinkets Ravelry page. There will be posts in both of those places. And if you want to win a fiber fist bump, right now, I can't sell these in my Etsy store. The only place you can get these right now is at the handful of yarn shops, like local yarn shops that are selling them. And they will have them in their possession. Well, the ones that are in the United States will have them in their possession probably by the end of next week. The ones that are in Canada postage, I'm not really sure, maybe 2 weeks-ish. But if you don't see them in your yarn shop by then you might have to tell your yarn shop owner about them and ask if they're planning on ordering, because that's how you can get them right now. But you can get 2 of them if you enter this contest. So I'll send them directly to you, and you don't have to live in the United States or in Canada. You can live wherever. I'll ship them to you wherever you are. So enter the Fiber Fist Bumps giveaway on Instagram and on my Ravelry group. Last couple of things I was going to tell you about this week. One of them is a podcast that I've been enjoying, actually for a long time. You've probably heard of the book called Freakonomics, and that's by Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. They're 2 economists, I believe, and they wrote this book, and it's a book that just kind of looks at questions, problems from the economics behind whatever the question is. So the podcast is very much like that. I really enjoyed the podcast that they published on May 10th of this year, and the name of it, warning, if you're sensitive about language and you have children with you, now's the time to pause. The name of this podcast is How Big Is My Penis? And Other Things That We Asked Google. So they had an author on, and he wrote a book, and that's what he wanted to call the book. But the book is actually called Everybody Lies, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. So what this podcast focuses on is something called the social desirability bias. And basically that just means that when researchers are trying to gather information, if they are in any way interviewing people, people lie. And the reason that we lie is because we want to look better to whoever it is that's interviewing us. Even if it's a person that is going to interview us and then we're never going to see that person again, we still want to look good to them. Even if we are filling out a survey and mailing it somewhere and we're never going to see any people at all, we still want to look good on the survey that we fill out. So that social desirability bias really, it puts a filter on the results that is very detrimental to anyone that's trying to get legitimate information out of people. And I think that in that sort of research, that they know that certain things are going to be underreported, and they use the example of voting. If you ask a bunch of people, did you vote in the last election? People are going to over-report. So there's going to be people that didn't vote, but they're going to say they did because it is looked down upon to not vote in an election. So people are going to over-report doing things that are desirable even if they didn't do it, and they're going to under-report how much they do things that are not desirable because that's embarrassing, or they don't want people to think badly of them. So there's a lot of interesting examples that they talk about on this podcast. I won't spoil it for you, but it's a very interesting look at the difference between the research that people are able to get from actually talking to people and doing surveys, and the research that we can now get because we have Google, and researchers can scrape different websites and get aggregate data to find out what people are actually doing and actually thinking about. So that was an interesting thing to hear about. And Freakonomics is always an interesting, like they have a lot of different a very wide variety of different topics. And it's always an interesting conversation. So if you're looking for a new podcast and you like to learn about different things, you might like the Freakonomics podcast quite a lot. So I would recommend the May 10th episode, How Big is My Penis? And Other Things We Ask Google. You might remember from, I think it was my very first podcast, I was talking about how our family was trying to eat meatless dinners. So we've been doing that since the beginning of this year, like sometime in January, we started doing that. And here it's middle of June, and we're still at it. And 3 of us really like it and definitely want to continue. I do have a teenage son who, I mean, he's fine, he's cooperating, but I can tell he would rather have a hamburger. So 3 out of 4 isn't bad. But I was going to share with you one of the new vegetarian meals that we found that we all, well, the 3 vegetarian among us really like. And it's a good, pretty healthy meal. And it's also a very quick meal because I have some dietary issues that I have to deal with. I don't find that I can buy a lot of prepared food. Most prepared food has either dairy in it or different additives that I like to avoid. So it's actually quite a treat if I find something that is already prepared that I can actually just buy and like have in the freezer on those days that I don't want to spend a lot of time cooking. So not recently, like a month and a half ago, we started eating falafel as one of our meals that we kind of rotate. I'm not sure what regular stores carry this. It's Ziyad brand, Ziyad. And it comes in a box, so you can either buy like the powdered mix, not powdered, like buy the grainy mix that you then add some stuff to, make it into balls, fry it yourself, or you can go to the freezer section and you can get the already made up and fried falafel. And all I have to do to prepare it is put it on a cookie sheet, brush each side with a little olive oil, put it in the oven at like 400 for 20 minutes or so and heat it up. So I'm terrible at frying things. When I try to fry things, I burn the outside and then the inside never gets cooked. And I know it's the temperature of the oil's too hot. Intellectually, I know what's wrong with the situation, but I cannot make it right. So I just have kind of given up on frying things because also, like, who needs a bunch of fried stuff, right? That's not good for you. So I would much rather have the factory fry them properly, and then all I have to do is bake them. So we put a couple of these falafels, like we use a pita and put maybe 3 or 4 of these little falafel things in the pita, and then we throw some lettuce, some cut up cherry tomatoes. I'll take a pickle and kind of slice the pickle lengthwise so there's skinny little pickle sticks. And sometimes there's a restaurant in town here that it's a Lebanese man that sells Lebanese food, but also like hamburgers and salmon and different things you can grill. But he makes really good garlic sauce that goes on some of his meals. So we'll stop over there and get a little thing of his garlic sauce to put on our falafel at home. And sometimes if we do that, we'll also pick up some fries and we'll put a couple fries in our falafel. I don't know, he does that with his wraps at his restaurant, and it's really yummy. So lettuce, pickle, cherry tomatoes, a couple of fries, and some of this garlic sauce. Or if you prefer tzatziki sauce, that's one that you can easily get at almost any grocery store. So in the Peoria area, we have a Mediterranean mart, and that's where we buy this falafel. But if you're in a city that doesn't have a sort of Mediterranean grocery store, then you might check some of the frozen food sections, and maybe you'll find some falafel there. Or at the very least, I'm sure that most grocery stores would have the dry mix that you can make and fry yourself if you are so inclined. But that's a really yummy meal, and it's not particularly heavy. It says here that we put about 4 of these little falafels on our wraps, and it says that's 250 calories. So you add in your pita, your vegetables, and then I might serve it, since there's already a bunch of vegetables on the wrap, I might serve it with like a bowl of berries or something like that. So, I mean, it's really a pretty reasonable dinner too, and it's very easy to prepare. So if you're looking for a new meatless dinner to try some falafel. Oh, by the way, in case you probably already know this, but in case you don't, the main ingredient of falafel is chickpeas. So it's ground up chickpeas and a bunch of spices. So give it a try. So I think that's all I have to talk about for this week. So I hope that you decide to pick out a blanket pattern and make a welcome blanket for a refugee family. That would be a great summer project, as long as you have some air conditioning, because I was reminded the other night at knit night that sitting with a blanket on your lap and knitting it in the summer is quite a warm sort of thing to do. So I would encourage you to get involved with that project and enter the drawing for the fiber fist bumps. I hope things are going great with your summer. I hope you're enjoying, if you have kids at home, I hope you're enjoying their time off with them. And I hope you're getting lots of knitting time done. Lots of sitting in the backyard on a lawn chair, or lots of knitting at the pool, or lots of travel knitting. Speaking of, I was going to just put it out there that podcasts might be a little, first of all, because I have to find some time when my family's out of the house to do them, because it's still weird to podcast while they're around. So that doesn't happen that often, but also because I'm working around travel plans and that kind of thing. So I was pretty regular there, posting them on Mondays and Tuesdays, but it might just kind of be a free-for-all for the next couple months, and that's okay. The good news is you might get some really short ones like today's. So I think that's about it. So I hope that you have a great couple weeks, and I'll see you next time. Bye!